You're watching Texas Progressive Time. And now, your host, Neil Durrance.
Welcome once again to Texas Progressive Time. My guest this week is Lorie Burch, an attorney here in the state of Texas, in the Dallas area, I believe.
Yes.
And I want to welcome you to our show. And we have a very interesting topic today, and that is the issues that face the LGBT community, the lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual, and transgender community here today. So thank you for agreeing to come on the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
Good. You practice law here in Texas, obviously.
I practice it. One day I hope to be good at it.
That's why they call it the practice of law, right? Do you have a particular specialty or area that you practice in?
Yes, actually, I focus pretty much exclusively on wills, trusts, living wills, powers of attorney, probate, what's considered to be estate planning.
How did this involve you in the issues of the gay community?
One of the reasons I wanted to focus on that area of law was to be able to extend my practice into the gay community, into the LGBT community, because currently our laws don't allow for any default inheritance, hospital visitation, medical decisions, you name it. So this is really all those couples have currently in Texas to fall back on in order to be able to make those most critical decisions for the person that knows them best in this world.
So in other words, it can be done, it just has to go a different route.
You know, what's interesting about my practice is it's not that the planning is necessarily that different, it's just the ramifications of not having it is what really hits home for these couples, because even judges and hospitals and banks that want to honor these relationships are not able to because the law just doesn't allow them to, and the only way to do that is to have this documentation put in place. And even at that, and it's why we do need to move laws along, pro-equality laws along, is because they still aren't always enough, but it certainly gets you where you're not going to be with the way the law currently is. We're
going to come back to that. I hope we'll be able to discuss that in length, if not today, certainly another day. But I wanted to get right to it. How do you feel about the recent developments about the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and where things are going at this point in time?
I really think it's a remarkable development to be able to get the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It is something that is a long time in the coming, but there are servicemen and women that are risking their lives for this country that were, until recently, having to lie in order to do that. And I think it's a wonderful thing that had so much support, so much bipartisan support, as well as at the Pentagon level, that it really is a tremendous move forward for the community, but for our country overall, and for these men and women who are risking their lives. It is such an honor for them to be able to be open and honest with who they are. The thing that's challenging about it is that we still have so far to go for the LGBT community to be treated equally in this country, that it is an irony that these men and women are risking their lives and fighting for freedoms that they don't get to enjoy in the country that they are defending. And the other side of that, with some of the setbacks that we have with the law, there still is inequality in the sense that these couples are not able to cover their spouses or their partners or their children. And I've had a female couple who served in the military that she wasn't able to actually cover her child and her spouse or her partner under medical benefits. So even though at the military level we have gotten away from this discriminatory policy, they still are not being treated equally when it comes to some of the rights and responsibilities that they have serving as our brave men and women of uniform.
Well, and let me ask you an even more fundamental question, because I hear this out in not only my practice, but out generally in the public here in Texas, and that is that I'm heterosexual. I am, by the way, but also, I hear people say, I'm heterosexual and somebody's gay. Why should we make any special allowances for somebody just because they're gay? What's the big deal?
Well, A couple of things about that is that it's not really anything special. In fact, it's a matter of just being treated the same and being treated equally. And until we put a voice to that, until we put real faces to the discrimination and the inequality that these couples are facing, we are going to hear about it. But I hear this from time to time as far as, you know, I'm heterosexual, I don't make a big deal about that, and actually you do. We're in the holiday season now, we're going to see plenty of commercials that have it right there in your face about loving couples. We have marriages, we go to work and we talk about what our spouse did or what we did on vacation. We don't realize just how much we aren't able to engage in just the regular social activities with one another. There's so many people, and this is why workplace discrimination, you haven't asked me about that yet, but why workplace discrimination is so important is that I would challenge anybody to go a whole week of their work week and censor their speech to not talk about their significant other, to not talk about what movie they saw, what vacation they've been on. And it really is a challenge. So we don't think that it is in your face, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's beautiful to have that commitment to share these relationships, but it very much is out there, and all that gay and lesbian couples are looking for is to be able to participate in that in the same way. Not in a special way at all. In fact, they are being treated special now because they're being singled out, that you cannot have these rights. You can get fired from your job. You cannot adopt children here, or you cannot get married, or you cannot do this. So right now, it's special. We'd like to not be special. We'd like to just be treated equally as any other couple.
So you're saying it's not a matter of being equal, it's a matter of being brought up to being equal.
Absolutely. Just
interesting perspective, because I hear the same thing out there, that people say, well, you know, we don't discriminate against people because they're gay. We don't need to add them as being a special class of people with scrutiny, like you would race or sex or religion or anything else, because we don't just affirmatively discriminate against them. What do you say to things like that?
Well, now you're getting into some potentially heavy constitutional arguments, which is my first love and passion in the law, and I'm happy to engage in that. So when you're using scrutiny and talking about special classes, the Iowa Supreme Court as well as the California Supreme Court have hit on this, and this really is the direction that we're going, is that when we look at the levels of scrutiny that are applied to classes, that sexual orientation falls in that category. Maybe not the strictest of scrutiny such as race, but certainly along the same intermediate scrutiny as gender, in the sense that it is an immutable characteristic, meaning that it's not something that can be changed, and there's ample evidence to show. And this is a group of individuals and couples that have been marginalized and been singled out. So maybe individuals don't do that, but we certainly are dealing with a situation in this country where people are being fired from their jobs because of being gay or being perceived to be gay. We have huge issues in school with bullying, of being singled out, and then I don't have to tell you, because it's such a hot topic, that there are many states and organizations that hit upon the marriage or civil union issue, singling out gay couples from the norm. So it's something that is being done. While an individual may be doing it, institutionally and government-wise, it is being done.
So there is a subliminal discrimination going on within our society. Well, I've even been more concerned about the fact that we hear some corporations who have said that if they find out that someone is gay or admittedly openly gay, they're immediately fired. That kind of a policy does exist even today, does it not?
Well, certainly does. It still happens for racial minorities. But the idea is to get the education out there, get some exposure to what individuals are going through and experiencing, and getting those protections put in place.
So I guess we've talked about some of the issues. What, in your opinion, is the major issues facing the LGBT community today?
Well, I will say this. I'm part of the community. I've been very active. It's been an honor to serve as the co-chair for the local Human Rights Steering Committee, as well as the chair of the board of directors for the North Texas GLBT Chamber of Commerce. So these are issues and concerns that I am entrenched with and familiar with. I will say that I'm not necessarily going to speak on behalf of the movement or behalf of the community, but I will say is that I believe that marriage is the most fundamental issue that is facing our country, our society, where we want to be and how we want to be represented, and certainly these loving couples. Because there's nothing about being gay or lesbian that more than who it is that you want to commit your life to. And as a society, we have said that marriage is the highest level of commitment. It comes with rights and responsibilities, binds you to our social fabric. So these couples want to participate in that. And I would say that is the most fundamental issue that we are facing. With that said, though, there are a myriad of concerns that we need to work on and need to progress on. But I would say, and this is my personal opinion, not my role in any other organization, that marriage is the promised land.
Mm-hmm. So, well, let's talk about that for just a minute. The same-sex marriage acts have passed in 4 states, I believe, have they not?
It's actually 6 jurisdictions,
okay,
including the District of Columbia.
How does the gay marriage issue stand here in Texas at the present time, and what is the effect of that?
Well, currently we have a constitutional amendment in place in Texas that was voted in 2005, and it did pass, that Texas will not recognize any type of marriage, civil union, domestic partnership, basically no type of relationship identification between 2 citizens of Texas. What has developed since then, though, in the sense of urgency here, is that other states have. And there are couples that have gotten married in other states, whether they were originally in Texas or they lived in those states and moved here. And as some relationships do, they fall apart. And there are no laws for them here to fall back on. And it really is causing a huge issue in our legal system and trying to bind people to have rights and responsibilities to individuals, to children. And it's causing a huge inconsistency in the law. So that's where we are in Texas.
Well, let me ask you about that, because you raised several good points there that I really have a lot of questions about. I understand the family code didn't allow gay marriage to begin with, and then we passed a constitutional amendment. Seemed a little redundant to me, but that's the way the status of the law. If someone now gets married in one of those 6 jurisdictions and the marriage is legal, they in that jurisdiction, and then they come to Texas, what happens if they do decide to get a divorce, or if they've adopted, they get the divorce, and then I want to move on to children. But,
sure, absolutely.
Yeah, what happens once they come back to Texas if they decide they want to get a divorce? Can't they just go in and file?
No, they cannot, because Texas is not able to recognize that marriage, therefore they are not able to grant the divorce.
Well, wait a minute. The family code, I disagree with you there. The family code says that if a marriage is legal where it was performed, Hawaii, New York, France, doesn't matter, that full faith and credit clause of the United States says it's good here in this state, isn't it?
It would be. However, because we have a constitutional amendment, which is a higher level, it would override that, and it's carving out an exception when it comes to same-sex couples.
But the constitutional amendment just says that, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, the constitutional amendment says that we do not recognize same-sex marriage. Mm-hmm. It doesn't say we don't recognize it from other states, or does it?
Yes, that it's our equivalent of the Defense of Marriage Act, the so-called Defense of Marriage Act, a DOMA, in that, yes, it will not recognize those relationships regardless of where they come from.
So in I don't want to get too technical here, but in family code law terms, it's just a void marriage?
No, because in order to void a marriage, it's saying that it wasn't a legal marriage in the first place. And so it was a legal marriage where it occurred, and this is really meaty stuff, and it gets family law attorneys really passionate in discussing the issues, because it is so interesting, and it really there's no better way to explain it other than it being an utter mess.
So right now, the way it stands at this point, and correct me if I'm wrong, the way it stands at this point, if there is a couple who was married in New York, they move to Texas, and decide next year it's just not working out, they want to get a divorce, what do they do? There's really nothing they can do. If they have disputes about property and assets, they are going to have to rely on the district courts, and they're going to have to treat them as two individuals that for whatever reason decided to cohabitate, share cars, share homes. They have to default to that, because what people don't understand all of the time is that while you don't necessarily have a residency requirement to get married in another state, these states you do to get divorced. So that's what gets missed. I've heard a lot, well, why don't they just go back to California or New York, Connecticut, Iowa, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Vermont? Why don't they go back there? Because they can't. They're not residents. And I believe in most of those jurisdictions, the residency requirement is about a year. So it's not practical. So in other words, they just go into a district court as two parties with a dispute over some property?
Well, and all that's going to do is potentially resolve property, but it's not going to grant them the divorce, because we can't give a divorce to a marriage that is not recognized.
I'm a lawyer and I've practiced family law for almost 30 years, and I have to tell you that answer, although I believe it's correct, makes absolutely no sense. It really doesn't.
I wouldn't say it's correct. I would say it's the reality, because it's what's happening. Because we have, I believe, one or two that are sitting in front of the Texas Supreme Court. Who knows if they're going to hear it or not? But it is something that's being litigated. But we don't have any answers on that.
Well, it would seem to me that, and again, I know I don't want to be too legal here, and you say it's presently working up through the courts. But I had actually considered, what if two people go in and file the divorce petition? If they're both agreed that they were married and are both filing for the divorce, who's there to dismiss the case and say, no, I'm not going to hear it, just the judge?
The judge does, because
really?
they're not allowed to. And if it does go forward, then we've had this go on and it gets appealed. And
what happens?
The Attorney General's actually stepped in and said just to void the marriage. And the problem, again, with that is to void a marriage, first of all, it doesn't give you a divorce decree. It doesn't settle property, child custody, because there are many, many children that are getting lost in this mix. But it also is saying that it wasn't originally a legal marriage. And Massachusetts, Iowa, Connecticut, these states are going to say, well, yes, it is. It absolutely was legal. So
and under full faith and credit of the Constitution.
It puts us in no man's land.
I was going to say, under full faith and credit of the Constitution, which is, of course, the federal document,
right?
Don't they have to recognize it?
Well, yes and no. Of course, I'm going to say yes. Traditionally, that the full faith and credit clause would apply here, because we have different requirements for marriage in different states. Where in Texas, you can marry your first cousin, of course, if they're of the opposite sex, that is. You can marry your first cousin, whereas another state
not advisable
may not allow that, but under the full faith and credit clause, they will recognize that marriage short of any other law. And that's really where the problem is, because we do have a federal Defense of Marriage Act, and Texas not only had a Defense of Marriage Act, but now has amended the Constitution. So that's the exception under the full faith and credit clause.
Okay, let's move on to one more point in the same vein, though. What about children? Now, people can adopt, whether they're heterosexual or gay, either way, can adopt children in other states, correct?
Yes and no.
Okay, well, you probably should explain that point, but let me get my question here.
Okay.
And that is, if someone or a couple has adopted children in another state and they move to Texas and decide it's not working out, then what happens?
Also kind of a no man's land, because one of the real downsides to not being able to have that relationship recognized is you have this awkward situation where you have children that don't have two parents that have legal responsibilities to each other, and depending on whether they are both legal adopted parents or whether one is, and we could talk all day about the way different laws work in different states as far as can both couples be adoptive parents, can one be the natural parent and the other adopt, and there are some states that don't allow that or have tried to pass laws that don't allow that. And then there are some instances where you can, and we have second parent adoption here in Texas that sometimes works. And so that is a little nebulous area of law as well. But assuming that there is, we still have this antagonistic situation where the parents, if the relationship did dissolve, don't have any rights and responsibilities necessarily to each other, and then that trickles down to the children.
Okay, now let's not, I don't want to get too hypothetical here, but I keep thinking of situations that I have seen where two people have interest in a child. Now the family code says if you reside with a child for over 6 months, you have standing, that is, you can go into court and sue. Mm-hmm. Well, if a couple had adopted, a gay couple had adopted children in another state, mm-hmm. they move here, don't they automatically have standing by virtue of the fact that the child has been living with them for over 6 months? And how is that complicated by the fact that one parent may be an actual biological parent?
There's a lot of answers to that. Okay. And there are just some limitations. There's also not knowing how to connect the child to the parent. But what I'm really emphasizing more is the two parents' responsibility to each other. Because we have this situation where, okay, we'll recognize this child to belong to this parent and this child to belong to this parent, but then in the eyes of the law, those two people are strangers to each other. And so that's where some of this becomes confusing in trying to, and it can be as simple, let me give you a real example, it could be health benefits. And trying to cover a spouse and then child and getting them covered on insurance or whatnot. And it, depending on the company, depending on the state, it's just very piecemeal. So it's a very confusing kind of system out there, not knowing who belongs what. Because you can have a family that is married with child in one state, you go to another state and suddenly they're not married, they're two strangers, but they both have a child, and then they go and travel to another state and maybe they have a civil union, and then you go to another state, well, they're strangers and that kid doesn't have any rights or responsibilities to, because there are states that won't recognize that adoption potentially. So it's just in a very global country where we do very much value states' autonomy to be able to direct some of the personal dealings that we have, it is causing a problem when it comes to this particular community trying to move and function within different states and the different laws that are all over the place.
We only have about 1 minute left, and we didn't even get to the DOMA Act and what all needs to be going on there, so I hope you'll agree to return and do a second show about this, because we're touching on a lot of areas that I'd like to get into. But quick question, and that is, if a gay couple, one of the parents is biologically had the child, mm-hmm. woman, and the other person adopted that child adopted the child, mm-hmm. is that recognized in the state of Texas now? It's not recognized, which is probably something you understand than a lot of people. But there's no law against it. Okay. So what that means is that yes, there are some courts that are granting those adoptions, but there are some that will not. Well, I think that may be a backdoor way to recognizing gay marriage in the state of Texas. I'll tell you, simply for the fact that, you know, a child can only have two parents, and if they recognize the fact that one was adoptive and the other one was the actual biological parent who was not terminated, then obviously they both have all the rights to a child that any parent would have. An issue that we're going to have to, I'd like to have more discussion with you about, because I think this is an area that, as you said, is fertile for both argument, but really needs to be addressed both in legislative level as well as through the law. Mm-hmm. And I would like to have you come back and do that again. It'd be my pleasure. Okay, well, thank you for coming, and we'll be right back after this short break.